Hello and welcome, my name is Trismegistus and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 401, New Terrain, New Planet. Posted by Arundel. Surprise! There are 5 new planets in the expansion. The first planet you arrive on is a strange new land, rich with iron, copper, coal, stone, oil and uranium. Everything a starting factory needs and more. There's also water, fish, grass and trees. Yes, this is a fertile land and we will thrive. We will rule over all this land and we will call it Nauvis. So yeah, basically this update is a little bit techie. It's not too bad if you're not a big fan of the techie ones, but basically Arundel has completely overhauled or overseen the overhaul of the terrain generation in Nauvis. I was a little bit, I don't know about skeptical, but I was a little bit sort of, oh, that's going to be, not very interesting, or maybe it'd be too techie. The results are actually amazing. I mean, when we get down to it, it makes Nauvis look like an actual planet rather than just a noise expression. So stick with it, and there's a lot of great pictures as well. So I'm trying to do the thing to encourage you to keep watching, because I know that this is not going to be one of those ones with lots and lots of views on it, but I really like the result of this. So yeah, we'll chat about it as we go along. So yes, the new planet, Nauvis, is similar to the 1.1 version of the map, but there are some substantial updates. Hopefully this is a surprise for you, because updates to the base map weren't planned at all. It just got harder and harder to not make changes after getting more experience with other planets and seeing things that were missing or broken. For clarity, these changes affect the 2.0 version in general and are not exclusive to the expansion. So these updates, these map improvements will be coming to everybody, basically. So everyone who owns Factorio will get the 2.0 version, and so everyone will get the new version of the map gen. This has been a solo project for me for a while, and it's only just come to a conclusion. Anyway, here's the story. Just as a little bit of clarification, in case you sort of wondered, but if you're familiar with the Alien Biomes mod, that was one done by Arundel. So it's very familiar with kind of updating the map and trying to put different terrain in, etc., etc. So a lot of what he's referring to is clearly things that he wanted to do when he was developing this, or some of the other mods, and wasn't obviously able to do because it was hard baked into the code, how it generated the map. So I think this is like quite a lot of the background of it. I don't know whether this means Alien Biomes will stop generating so many flipping rocks, because that's its most annoying feature. I hope so. But yes, anyway, back to the Friday Facts. Stealth dunes. After working on Folgora, the Nauvis deserts weren't looking so good. In fact, they barely seemed like a proper desert at all. I know that the game had sand dunes, but they never seemed to spawn in areas near me. It's only flattish sand dirt with a lot of brown grass even in the driest areas. I decided to investigate. So Folgora is the newest planet that they've revealed, which is the one with the red desert and those oil rivers sort of thing. It doesn't really make it clear whether the new map gen approach was applied in the Folgora, on when we saw Folgora basically, or if this has come in kind of later, because the implication is that these map gen changes can be applied to the other planets, but also not. I think he's made it a bit more sort of, I don't know about modular, but a bit more sort of, if you want this on and not this on, and when you're setting up a planet, for example, if you're a mod adding a new type of planet, then you'd be able to pick and choose which of the features that he's added in you can use. But this sounds like the origin of how it sounds like it's snowballed basically. So these dunes was a decorative type that was supposedly in the game, but he'd never seen it spawn. And I confess I'd never actually seen what I thought were dunes. I don't think. So, it's difficult to tell, obviously, because of how he goes on to explain that the problem was. Earlier in 1.0's development, there were sand dune decoratives in the deserts. Apparently, the integration with tilesets wasn't satisfactory, so they were temporarily removed. Well, they were not removed completely, because if they were really removed, then if they get put back, they'd need to be respawned in existing games. Instead, the decorations are still there in the game state, but they look like brown grass instead, just a temporary graphic swap. Unfortunately, they were never put back. I'll be honest, I got confused reading that through, and it may just be me, but what I think the point is that the kind of tile set, the graphic that was the sand dunes, didn't integrate properly. When it was plopped down, it didn't look right. And so rather than kind of remove it, or set the code so that it wouldn't use it or something like that. Instead, they swapped in the graphics for a grass. And so where it's putting down sand dunes, according to the code, it's actually putting grass down because they've swapped out the graphics, because the grass, they obviously knew already integrated okay. I think that's what's being said. And so, if you then put the graphics for the sand dune in the file that is called sand dunes, then it'll put the sand dunes in just as a simple change, basically. I wasn't a fan of the grassy desert, so I inquired about changing it, but it seemed like this was an uncomfortable topic that no one really wanted to get into. One evening I decided to clean up the old dune decorative graphics as a secret side project. I was already familiar with the assets because I'd used them in the Alien Biomes mod, and I knew I could get something good done quickly. This version uses relief effect tricks to better integrate with terrain. Basically, making it much more transparent, but then adding low transparency pure white and black on top to modify the brightness of the terrain underneath. So we've got the slidey diagrams are back. It's a while since we've seen the slidey diagrams. I love the slidey diagrams. But yes, so there we got this is what the dunes were like. Although, as I say, obviously they weren't in the files. So these were obviously in some archive somewhere, I guess, or some old version of the code. But these are the original dunes, and this is the tweaked version of them. As you can see, they are basically the same, but the way the transparency is being done, and transparency, is just the ability to see through something. So obviously, the more see-through it is, the more of the underlying terrain will come through. So we've got old dunes, new dunes, old dunes, new dunes, old dunes, new dunes, old dunes, new dunes. So you can see quite a difference, but the graphics are just unchanged as such. The result looks good on all three of the sand types, so I could be more flexible with the placement. The old Decoratives used a Peaks auto-place format, which I won't go into, but it's an older, more limited system. I replaced it with a new noise expression formula that's adapted from my code on other planets. That lets the dunes fade in more gradually over multiple sand types and gives a nice transition effect. So as the caption says, this is just comparing the old and new dunes. I've zoomed out a little bit so that you can see the full thing. But this is the old effect. I can see what the problem, I can see why it was problematic or considered problematic, because they just do look like things that have been dumped on top of it. What I would say is when you have actual desert, when you have like rock in desert and it's been partially covered by sand, that's what this looks more like. So to some extent, I wouldn't have minded this being in the game and just looking like that, because it'd look like buried rocks basically. But if it's meant to be sand dunes, yes, it doesn't really look like sand dunes. So this is the new version, and all that remember is being done is the way it's being integrated in. So the graphics are not, the actual graphic file is not being changed. It's just being made to look more like, I don't, if you've never used Photoshop or any of these graphics, but you have like overlays and, blooms and all this sort of stuff that you can use to integrate effectively textures onto things rather than actual pictures and stuff like that. So that's effectively what this is shifting more towards. So now it looks like the underlying colour, but it's an effect on top of it, so it looks like a raised piece of sand. It's not perfect, if I'm honest, and but you wouldn't notice really, because this sort of mottled texture should change basically, and it doesn't. It's just like the same overlay of the mottled texture. So that's not changing that mottling effect. But it looks a heck of a lot better, I would say. So we've got old dunes, new dunes, old dunes, new dunes, old dunes, new dunes, old dunes, new dunes. I love the slider thing. The PR, pull request, to get the changes made in the main game was successful and with no drama. So my stealth dunes project ended up as a first foot in the door to changing the Nauvis map generation. So pull request, it's basically just talking about how they're doing how they do the management of the game basically. So not much point going into that, but basically that's a request to make a change. A lot of times you have to document things and sort of say, well, why are you changing it? What are you making better? What's the plan for it? Come up with a design document, that sort of thing. Depends on how detailed they're going, but the basic idea is saying, right, well, I want to change this thing, and your instinct sometimes as a coder is just to dive in and change things, and the point is there's probably quite a lot interdepending, but also if you just change things, you could break something, or the thing you change was perfectly fine or exactly what somebody else wanted, etc., etc. So if you document what the change is proposed to be, what the new design is, for example, then people can review it and just say, no, I don't like that, or yes, I like that, or yes, but do it this way, or what have you, in order to basically have control. Because as I say, otherwise sometimes, I've done dev where everyone just, works on everything all the time, and you end up with completely conflicting approaches. So yes, basically that's what they're talking about there. And essentially, as I say, this is like a snowballing thing, and it does kick in later on with the sort of proper map gen. Investigating missing decoratives. I started noticing that some of the other decoratives that I was familiar with from the graphics files didn't seem to appear in the world. Again, that would be from looking through the game files and basically looking at what the graphics are available, and then thinking, well, where is this particular shape? Where is this particular thing? And there is a tree that's referenced later on that clearly wasn't spawning or wasn't being put on the map because, and it was there in the files, but it would never spawn. And so why was that? Looking through the decorative placement code, each one seemed to be more or less correct, or at least reasonable. They had the correct graphics, they were assigned to the correct planet, and their assigned spawn regions didn't have impossible values. So nothing obvious was wrong. So there again, I think that assigned spawn regions, basically that's sort of saying, one of the things it could have been accidentally doing was that it was accidentally assigned to water. So, it's a decorative for water, but it's a tree. And then there's some other bit of code that come along and goes, no, trees can't be on water, and just kills it off. And so if that particular graphic was always set onto water, then you would never see it because, it's been taken out of the game through another process. So what they're saying is that nothing apparently wrong there. But then I noticed something else, a pattern, a set of similarities. Some of the settings were uncomfortably similar, and in fact, there were some that were identical to other decoratives. That might not sound like a big deal, but here's why it is. The placement of one decorative excludes the placement of other decoratives that would be placed after. They block each other. If they're trying to place in different places, that's fine. If they have some overlap, that's okay, because the second one will only appear where the first one didn't. If the settings are identical, though, the second decorative will never get placed anywhere. So just to use a random example, if there's a location thing, and it's obviously an algorithm because the maps are generated, but basically if the algorithm says always place a tree, one tile up and one tile, so this is a terrible example, but one tile up to the right and one tile up from the edge of a water. So you'd end up with a line of trees close to the water. So it does that, but then there's another tree placement thing that says always place it to the right and always place one up. So it's basically trying to place it on exactly the same place as another decorative. Now, if it was slightly different, so it was 1.1 tiles over, then it would appear because it would, be there. But if it's exactly the same, then there's a thing there already, and the code says there's a thing there already. I'm not going to replace it with the other one. I will just ignore the replacement. Now, as I say, part of this, because it's all noise based, it's all randomized, you'll end up with it's not going to be that sort of simple, direction. It would roll a dice, for example, and say, yes, place a tree, place that one. But the point is, you need some kind of table, essentially. Might be one way of doing it that says if the value you've rolled in your map, in your RNG is between 0 and 5, place this type of tree. If it's between 6 and 10, place that type of tree. And you could get feathering effects where you have, for example, between 2 and 7 and between, say, 1 and 3. And so when you roll, you're getting different chances of different things happening, even if you roll the same number. So it'll pick a different one, and you'd need some, deconflicting code, for example. But the point is that those settings were identical for other decoratives. So it would roll, and it would pick, tree type 1, and it would put in tree type 1. But then it would roll, and it would roll tree type 7, and tree type 7 has exactly the same parameters as tree type 1. So tree type 1 is already there, so it's not going to place it on top. So tree type 7 would never appear, and that's the type of conflict we're talking about. So I don't know the exact, parameters, but that's the type of thing, because they've got exactly the same settings, and it never places one on top or replaces. It will never put the other one on. That's a really long explanation of something that's fairly obvious, and I've just realised this video is going to be massive already. So I'm giving myself a great fun editing time. So that's a problem, but also an opportunity. This is a great way to use the skills learned from other planets to improve the Nauvis Decoratives. Not only can the new system be faster, but it can just look a lot better in terms of distribution and controlled placement. I started mapping out all of the Nauvis Decoratives. There are 3 axis variables that control placement: moisture, temperature, and aux, which is auxiliary basically, I assume. Aux is the terrain type variable that controls differences like the Nauvis Yellow Desert from the Nauvis Red-ish, but still mostly yellow-brown desert. These control the wide-scale distribution, but there's also a noise layer variable that controls the smaller scale placement and patchiness and is like a 4th axis, but with discrete increments. So what you have to think about there is that this is a set of numbers, set of values that each of these parameters can have. And so if you think about them as being aligned with the X, Y, and Z axis, then you can kind of understand what's being said. So the moisture, so that might be if you plot that as an X axis, it'll have a value, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, will correspond to a different moisture value. And that determines a particular type of placement on a particular location. Temperature might be the Y. So is it hot or is it cold? And that desert is hot. Grassland is cold, for example. And aux, which is the type, which is whether it's red desert or yellow desert, for example. And you can kind of see that you've then got 3, you've got a Z-axis then of the type, but then there's also another dimension, which is where you get into 4-dimensional space. Oh, so that's a noise layer. Okay, so basically that's a random jigger, basically a random thing on top of it that controls the patchiness. So does it do it or doesn't do it? So when you see the trees and it has a jiggly jaggly edge and it's just, there's some bits where there's no trees, some bits where there's loads of trees, then that's the noise coming in, basically. Is my assumption. I obviously don't know. I've not seen the code, but that's my assumption. It's good to map this out visually to check for unwanted overlaps, desired share of the possible space, etc. There is a lot more overlap than I was expecting. Some decoratives were missing completely, but over half of them had their range heavily restricted by other decoratives getting in the way. Again, the point being that, well, let's actually show you the picture. So this is kind of where he's getting to. The new decorative placement volume visualized in Blender. So you see how we've got 3 values now. So moisture can have a value between 0 and 1. So as it increases, for example, I'm probably actually going that way maybe, I'm not sure, but whatever, it can have a value between 0 and 1, and that corresponds to, you see that how these have different sort of color blocks going that way, or rather different colored blocks going that way. And aux, which was that, what was that? That was the type basically, wasn't it? So then that's got parameters going that way. And temperature is then stacked on top. So that can have a value between 10 and 20, for example. So it's stacked on top. So that then, if you imagine, so 0.7 for moisture, aux of 0.3, and temperature of 15, then that corresponds to a point on that map. And so the point is that for each of these types of terrain, they're defining that area of that, or that volume of that block. So as you can kind of see with these cubes, they are defining a particular volume, and when the dice roll and what have you goes into that volume, it will pick that one. And the point, I guess, really is that several of these cubes completely overlapped. And so because of how it does it, it would go through the first one, place it, go through the second one, get the exact same, position or placement point, what have you. Because it was already there, it wouldn't place it. Mapping the 4D state isn't so bad. I've developed some systems for SpaceX to deal with a 12D system. So 4D is a nice break in comparison. D stands for dimension, so it's basically just the X, Y, Z, and then you get a bit more abstract when you go into more dimensions. I can use the 3-dimensional axis in Blender, X, Y, Z, to display the main volumes occupied. Blender is just a graphics program. It's a lot of games use Blender to build the graphics, basically. 4th axis for noise layer is the color of the box, which is, in this case, is really convenient because the noise layer is discrete and rangeless. It has a single value, not a min-max range. So you can see how these are differently coloured blocks, basically. Here's the fixed distribution. The previous state was all over the place, but I don't have a copy of that, and I don't want to do the data entry to recreate it. So this is the result, basically. So the point would have been that you wouldn't have kind of been able to tell because they'd have overdrawn the blocks basically, but some of these overlapped in ways that meant they couldn't appear. The new decorative placement volumes are visualized in Blender. The old system had an extra limitation in that it can't do decorative groupings, like having large variants in the middle of a cluster and small ones further out. This wasn't problematic enough on its own to deserve an upgrade, but being able to improve this is another side benefit. Assume that's something like, I was saying about the rocks being annoying in alien biomes, but they always do look like a sort of random distribution of rocks, and I guess the idea would be this is just an example, but you could have it so that big rocks were in the middle and small rocks were around the edge, so it looks like some kind of, hill or something like that. That's the type of thing I assume that's being referenced there. The new system has everything remapped so that everything can be placed, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Things have moved around to accentuate certain areas of the map. Deserts are drier. Some arid areas have more red plants, other areas more white plants. In the grassy area, there are many subregions with different mixes of plants and more clustering. We then got a whole set of pictures here. I'll just scroll through them and then we'll go through the individual ones and we'll just take a kind of look at them. But the basic point is it's more thematic is the idea. So I wouldn't have said it was too bad to start with. I don't think it was horrendous. But the point is that essentially, they're clustering together the same types of decoratives to give it a more consistent feel, so that, for example, these dead trees are probably more prevalent in a particular area because that's gone really hot or it's been desertified. It was grassland before, now it's desert, and so you've got more dead trees. So it's that type of thing. I'm going to talk about and say we'll run through the individual pictures in a moment. But the last comment is just that, sure, most of it will get paved with concrete, but it feels more meaningful if that was the only area of your map so far that looked this way. Okay, so we'll just kind of go through the pictures. This is obviously a bit of grassland, and point here being these plants, these, I don't know what you call them, flowers or bushes or what have you. They're all sort of consistently in a particular area, so it's not a total randomization of the plant types. You're getting things mixed in, to give it that more organic, more real world, I guess, type look. But yeah, you've got lots of consistent, the same type of white bushes. Again, this is kind of putting up, because this whatever you call it, gorse, or this that's a decorative as well. So if you were to turn decoratives off, you wouldn't see that. And so those are kind of all clumping together around this more brownish texture, and it's also closer clumped to the tree line basically. So they're more consistent together. You then got, I don't know what this is meant to be, some sort of almost like a clover type of thing, but again, even more emphasis that it's all sort of together, and it looks like, because that's, if you went down into a marshland or a bog or something, you would see lots and lots of the same types of plant. If you then wander up the hill and there's a more normal type of grassland, you wouldn't see the same plants that you'd just seen. It would be different plants, and that's the effect that it gives. So these pinky red ones, I don't actually recognize some of these, but that's probably because for years I played with decoratives off. I find them a bit annoying for finding the edges of ore patches. But there's also a thing here, I don't know if this is included, but this sort of muddy texture appears to be sort of more consistently grouped together as well. So you've got a patch of muddiness here and a patch of muddiness here. So I don't know if that's part of it as well. But yes, so I don't recognise some of these, and I don't know if that's because I say they've never spawned, or simply the fact that I'm not familiar with the decoratives as I might be. Again, more sort of clustering and grouping. And here we are with the desert. So I guess the point being to try and make sure that the desert type plants are on there. It's almost like a sorting thing, isn't it? Of sort of saying, right, well, instead of randomly, picking one flower, always pick these types of flowers in this type of terrain. And here we go. More decoratives collect together. There's just loads and loads of examples, really. Again, I don't know if the rock placement thing is improved as well. I don't think those count as decoratives, but maybe it uses the same code to work out where they are. Again, it starts to look more like a desert, doesn't it? Where it's, all this cracked, dry, barren terrain, and then the odd little hardy bush together, and where these have, what would you call it, like seeded new plants. Those are therefore close together, and you're just getting the odd random little bit of different type of plant where it's more, and it gives more a consistent visual feel. Again, more examples for desert. Lots of clumping together and clustering again. Again, your things here. The only thing I would say on this, and I did when I was going through this, is like, if this is meant to be a watering hole, effectively, you'd think there'd be more vegetation around it, because it'd like to be an oasis. That'd be quite cool for them to add in. And say, it gets really good later on. And then, I think, is this the last one? Yeah, this is the last one of these. And I say, trying to group together maybe the dead trees, because they would be dead all in an area because it got really scorched or what have you, or maybe because maybe we're getting coronal mass ejections and stuff. These have all been killed off by the last one or something like that. But yes, so it's just lots of examples of the same basic point. Nauvis Cliffs. Cliffs are annoying, right? You think you'll be able to get rid of them in a few minutes, so you build like they're not even there. But they just get in the way. The concept of a cliff fort sounds cool. Maybe you've experimented with placing some turrets defended by cliffs, but it never works as well as you hope. Large lakes are useful barriers, but cliffs just aren't. Why is that? And this is where things start to get awesome. So if you've born with it so far, when it was just about decoratives and you were maybe a bit sort of, well, so what, this is where it starts to get awesome. The first reason is that cliffs have loads of gaps. Every gap needs to be defended. So if you have a gap in the cliff every 6-ish cliff segments, then you more or less need continuous turret coverage anyway. Yes, the cliff means you need fewer walls, but the enemies only need one gap to get through, and following a cliff is harder to build around than a good defended wall blueprint. So the point there basically being that because cliffs aren't a continuous unbroken line in the way it's done, they don't act as barriers, basically. There's usually not that far before there's a gap in the cliff, which is kind of a benefit to the player as well, because it means you don't have to go so far to get through around the cliff. But of course, then biters can just get through that gap. So all you're really saving is a few little bits of wall. And of course, a cliff, and it shows one, the current gen down here, even though these are relatively straight in places, they're still wiggly and bumpy. And it's just a pain. I've tried to use cliffs on a couple of occasions as defensive things, and they just don't work. But there's another important point that Arundel talks about as well. The second reason is that cliffs follow elevation bands. Think about it. A lake is a good defensive obstacle. You'd probably make walls as lines between lakes if they're conveniently placed. And that's what, I think everyone does. If you're going to make walls, not everyone builds walls, but if you're going to build walls, then you look for gaps between water patches that you need to defend, and you just defend those gaps, basically. Yeah, that's what I do. I think it's what most players do. And then the cliffs, though, use the same elevation data as the lake. This means that in most cases, the cliff is just an extra ring around the lake, and that's not useful. A cliff parallel to a lake is mainly defending against the lake direction, but there's already a lake there doing a better job, because biters cannot cross water. So they're not going to be coming across the water. So what is the lake defending? Or, of course, it's defending the coast from the inland, but that's not useful either, because what are you building on the coast that is going to need defending by a cliff? There's a boat mod, so you could maybe defend, a harbour point or something like that, maybe. But in practice, are you going to really do that? If you've got a boat, it's probably being fed by belts. So you've got a factory that's trying to deliver belts, for example. So you wouldn't want the cliffs there anyway. And they're not defending. They're still not defending anything, because the biters are, if they're able to get at your belts, they're going to chew on your belts, aren't they? So yeah, that's a very good point. It does make sense, if you think about it, where you've got like a quarry's a very good example, where it's been left to go. They've stopped doing the quarrying and it's filled up with water, and so you've effectively got cliffs around a lake. It's in essence, and of course a natural dip in the land terrain is where the water would fill in. So cliffs around lakes isn't that bad a thing in that sense, but in terms of as a useful object in Factorio, it just defeats the point. In most cases, the cliff ends up in the way if you try to make a wall between two lakes, and often gets in the way twice. So the example here, as I was wafting my mouse around, if you're trying to build a wall across here, then you've got two bits of cliff that are right in the way. And in fact, this is an even worse example. You'd probably be building somewhere here or something like that, and you've got loads of cliff that's just in the way. And it serves no purpose at all. It doesn't really funnel the biters into some area that you would want to focus your defences in this area, and the cliffs funnel them in because it's just a great big open gap. They could obviously come along the coast, I guess, but it's not really achieving anything at all, that cliff. So it's no wonder most of us kind of turn them off. And yes, this is an example of cliffs in 1.1, high cliffness to show the lines. So basically, it ramped up the cliff setting so that you can see the things there. And what that actually does is it de-emphasises the point about the gaps. If it was normal settings, there would be loads and loads of gaps in these, and rendering them almost completely pointless and just annoying. For Nauvis, the real objective becomes clear. If we're stuck with cliffs here, then they should exist in the most useful, least annoying way possible. This simple idea ended up turning into a planet generation overhaul. So yes, my fears about cliffs and etc. in the space age expansion hopefully are being alleviated by this, because it looks like cliffs are getting a nice overhaul. I mean, I wasn't going to talk about what the overhauling generally is, but the result, just as a spoiler, seems to be really good. So, this looks like it'll probably solve or at least help with a lot of the problems of cliffs. But even if it doesn't, the visual improvement is awesome. And so we'll come on to that much later on. But the look of it now of map generation is just massively better. Mesas Terrain. The first attempt was based around the idea of having a series of defensible plateaus. They'd have some cliffs around them, but they wouldn't follow the same lines as the lakes. To do this, the land above water was mostly flattened, and then the hills were added to the existing land separately. The result was better than 1.1, but still not good enough. The cliffs wouldn't be in the way as much as 1.1, but they were only marginally more useful than before. The problem was a lack of good control over where the gaps in the cliffs would go. Too many gaps in the cliffs meant they're not useful as barriers against enemies while they're still getting in the way of building. So then got a little example of that. Cliffs in Nauvis rebuild attempt number 1. High cliffness to show the lines. So again, cliffness has been ramped up, but we can now see that they are divorced to some degree from the water, lake generation. So in the other map where we would expect cliffs to be running around the edges of a lake or a water feature, they're not, although they sort of are in places, which is fine. It wouldn't matter if it was occasional. But the idea seems to be that this represents a plateau. By mesas, I think it's referring to this, basically. So an isolated flat top elevation ridge or hill. So we've got a couple of visual examples here. So I think you can see what Arundel was trying to go for, in that you've got the cliffs then kind of defining this plateau here. Another example here being this, sort of area here. This is a plateau, and that's a plateau there. And then the cliffs are the kind of edging to that plateau. And I think that's what represented by a mesa. And then another really good example here. This is Mount Garfield, I think it said it was. I just clicked on it. But then, these would be the cliffs basically, and that's the plateau up there. What's really needed is longer, unbroken cliffs, but fewer cliffs in total. Sadly, there was no way to do that in the existing code, I presume. Let's go on a tangent for a moment. Precise cliffs. I usually try not to look at the C++ code, because every time I do, I get compelled to start changing things, like the fluid mechanics. Please change the fluid mechanics. When really, I should be focusing on other things. The call of the cliffs was just too strong, and before I knew it, I was rewriting some of the core cliff placement code. The first time this happened was when I was working on Folgora. It was impossible to make the cliffs following the intricately placed island edges. It just didn't seem to be possible to make the cliffs and tiles match up. I found that the reason is because the cliffs are smoothed. Smoothing is an attempt to make cliffs coherent even when the elevation data is noisy. It was needed on old Nauvis because the elevation gets messy sometimes. The smoothing was a nightmare for planets that need more precise cliff placement like Folgora. Folgora also doesn't have an erratic elevation, so the smoothing wouldn't do anything useful. My first change to the Cliff C++ code was adding a way to disable smoothing on some surfaces. Suddenly, all the cliffs snapped into their proper place. The cliff problem on Folgora had been plaguing me for weeks, So to say this was a relief is an understatement. With smoothing, without smoothing, please slide the white bar left and right. So satisfying. The left side is the original version, so this is what the original generation in Factorio did, and the right side is the new version. The difference is, I mean, we're also getting confirmation that these are cliffs, officially. So they're not alien walls or something like that. They are cliffs. And basically, you can see here, this is quite a good example of it, that the smoothing algorithm is taking this cliff that needs to be pinned to this exact edge. You can see the very definite visual difference between the oil lake bed area and the elevated terrain piece that is where we've got the wrecked cities. So you've got this nice sharp edge to that differentiation between the two terrain types. And what Arundel wants is that for those cliffs to be pinned to be exactly the same around this edging, okay? But the smoothing algorithm is coming along and saying, right, I need to make this look a bit more like a natural cliff, so we will smooth some of the angles out. And therefore you get this complete mismatch between where the cliff should be and where they actually are. So in the improved version, where the smoothing is just switched off, there may be some other tweaks as well, but it's just switched off, it's now matching exactly the edging of the cliff. So clearly the cliff writing out, piece of code was saying put it along here, smoothing comes along and just, changes it. And so by switching smoothing off, it fits exactly where it's supposed to. One of the things that is slightly interesting here, maybe it's just because it was taken at a different time and something like that, but the actual, I don't know if you notice in this middle area here, what's in there changes. So I guess these have placement, we always, they would have to sort of thing, but they obviously have a placement algorithm and it's being affected as well. Or that could just be that this was taken, weeks later and it had been changed how it did it. But a lot of the stuff remains the same. So this, for example, this big structure is exactly the same, and then the stuff around it, apart from we get one less tower there, for example. And then this one on the edge appears because smoothing was killing it off with the cliff, basically. But, we do get variation in what's being generated. So there is clearly, and I hope we get Friday Facts about that as well, clearly a thing of how it's generating where to place these things and try to make them look, like consistent. And because these are decoratives as well, I believe, the sort of ridgy type effect that I think are meant to be like roads, they were saying. So yeah, it's a huge improvement, and then it sort of ends up doing what it's supposed to do, basically, creating a plateau style. Freeform Cliffs. Back to the plan for Nauvis. I've been thinking about the cliff situation for a while. Now that I was more familiar with the core cliffs spawning code, I saw a clear way of making some minor changes that will let the cliffs use a completely different noise expression for their placement. This means that cliffs can go in directions completely independently of the planet's water. They use the water elevation by default, but a planet could specify a different expression if they wanted to. I assume that means that the code could express, a different expression. I don't think the planet itself is expressing it as such. But this is more conceptual. I think it's just, it's MS Paint type stuff. But basically left lots of cliffs, but none are useful. So this is the current way it's doing it. Right, fewer cliffs and has the potential to be useful. So a cliff that goes across. And as you can see, it does create a funneling effect, for example. You've got biters, for example, coming this way. I guess maybe that way. But they're coming across this land bridge type area. And it just means you can defend this bit, and you don't need to bother with this bit because they can't get through the cliffs. Obviously, you would be limited. You wouldn't be able to place anything too close to that because spitters could spit across. But basically, you're then having to defend two little bits, and that's it. And of course, here, as we were saying, this has no effect whatsoever. You could try maybe and use this as a choke point, but it's got a massive gap here. It's just useless. It's just in the way in the original version. The main plan was to make a small number of long cliffs, as mentioned earlier. Fewer of them means they wouldn't get in the way as much. Long, unbroken cliffs would be a better barrier against enemies, but it's also a better barrier to your base expansion, and that's a good thing. If there's a huge cliff, you're less likely to ignore it and build into it, you're more likely to build away from it. By affecting your large-scale building more, it affects your small-scale building less, and that's much less annoying. In other words, if you've got a cliff like this, you're going to build with the intention of using it as a barrier. Your intention might be to get rid of it, but if you're thinking, right, I can use this as a choke point, and I know I need to be this far away before spitters, so I will just not build in this direction. I will build upwards or across, or or what have you. Whereas here, how would you build around this? You'd have to try and build something tiny in this small area, or maybe take trains down the side or something. It's just not a useful thing at all on any level. It's just literally in the way. Whereas if you're looking at this and going, oh, I can use that. The other thing I would say, he didn't quite mention it, but the point, he doesn't quite explain it in this way, but if this was a long unbroken chain, okay, and imagine it's flipped around, so it's actually a long unbroken chain here or something like that, you're going to look at that in a different way, because with the gaps, you can run around the edge. So if this had lots of gaps, imagine, say it was much, much longer, but it had gaps in it, your temptation, and I know from playing it, on mine anyway, is to like run around the gap and build on the other side. And you just sort of get to here and your belts are sort of interacting with the cliff. So you go, oh, I'll just underground it and keep working on the other side. So you just keep going. Yeah? And the point would be, if this was a huge, great, long cliff and you haven't got cliff explosives, which we know are being delayed to late game, you're not going to look at that and go, oh, I'll just do an underground and move on the other side, because that's a gigantic trek halfway around the belt, halfway around, the map sort of thing, just to get to the other side. So you're just automatically going to say, right, I will avoid that cliff and just plan my base in a more cliff-friendly way, if you see what I mean. I think that's going to be a little controversial, basically, but that's more, I think, because people have just got used to working around cliffs and destroying them or turning them off. And this is a different sort of mindset, I think, that you have to have. Fewer cliffs inherently means they're also in the way less. But this is a secondary concern because you can always use the terrain controls to affect this as you like. The shape when they are there is the most important thing to justify their existence. In other words, you can still turn them off, you can still turn them high, still turn them low. But the point is that where it's placing them needs to represent a useful thing for you to even want to have them on. The plateau shapes from earlier were still a good starting place for cliff placement. It's a good starting shape for larger plateaus, but can also be used for effects like canyons. The biggest difference is scale. The features are just much larger. We now got another one of these funky diagrams that I really love. I used it on the last thumbnail when we did these, and I think it tanked my views. It's just a random red and orange blobbage. But basically, this is a visualization. It says it's a debug visualization of cliff plateaus. Dark is a low area, bright is a high area. And I think you can kind of see what's going on there. It's effectively defining blobs, and then some of these would be picked as being the plateaus, and the cliffs would be placed around the edge. And of course, this is completely independent now of the water. So you could have water being placed all over here, and then it just picks these ones in the middle, or one in the middle, to do the plateau around. Now we get really good, because it's going to give some huge improvements, this as well. So this leads to another nice opportunity. The cliff elevation at this point is completely separate from the water elevation. But when you have a line of cliffs heading to the water, you expect the coastline to be different, showing that the area above the cliff would extend further into the water as that area is higher. So that's what I did. The cliff elevation is added to the water elevation. This creates some nice terrain features, river-like sections that lead to canyons, peninsulas guarded by cliffs, and some nice new islands. And just bam, it's a river. And it's a river, the caption, a river-like formation. And the river is leading into something that looks a bit like an estuary as well. Just instantly looks way better. It just looks more realistic, straight off. It was this point, when I was reading it through the first time, I was like, okay, so this is all very interesting and what have you and blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly, bam, you've got something that really does look like a river in Factorio. And then the next one here, a canyon-like formation. And it's referring to this part here. So effectively by, using this height thing as well, if you set it as a water thing, then you get a river. If you set it as a cliff thing, then you get a canyon, basically. But again, looks really canyon-like, What's also, it's sort of spoilering it a little, but what also helps that is this colouring. So the actual terrain that's been placed in these is being sort of massaged to this as well. So you've got a sort of a lighter brown path going through the canyon, which is what you kind of get in canyons. It looks different, and of course there may have been a river running through it, so it starts to look like a dried riverbed perhaps. Remaking the terrain. The problem is that adding the cliff elevation to water elevation decreases the amount of water. The water level can be adjusted to add more water back, but that mostly floods the canyon areas. It's the main disadvantage of the plateau shapes being surrounded by lower land. If the water level is higher, it all ends up as a disconnected islands. That's not ideal for Factorio because you get cut off from the biters and need landfill or elevated rail to connect areas. It's better if most of the land stays connected. Problem: plateaus tend to create islands, the caption says, and I think... maybe not. I thought maybe it was that one initially. It is, isn't it? So if you look at this shape here, and this shape here, and this shape here, and this shape here, then it's that shape there, that shape there, that shape there. So you see it's this generation here where it's picking out, a plateaus type system, and then if you set the values right, water is the dark stuff, you end up with lots and lots and lots of tiny islands, which is a way of playing the game, but it does mean that this would be a pretty tough thing for a sort of a normal player to play on. Also, as it happens, you'd have to change like the spawning stuff for resources because there is not enough stone on this tiny little island, because that would be the starting point. You can maybe get across to there, and maybe land bridge across there, but you're going to really struggle with that amount of stone to make bridges, basically, little bridges you can go on to get to the other resources. So yeah, so that would then impact lots of other parts of the code. The plateau system is great, but doesn't work, basically. You may remember Friday Facts 390, that I already have a solution to this problem. Ridge-based elevation, where you have narrow strips of connected land, while the rest is mostly water in disconnected lakes. It's basically the opposite of plateaus. Using this sort of noise to make more reliable land bridges, mixing in the base terrain and then adding the raised cliff areas gives a really nice result for gameplay, and it looks great too. Okay, so we've got another slidey diagram. I'm going to zoom this one out so you can kind of see the full effect. But the caption says, the same raw plateau as before, on the left, the actual terrain of plateaus mixed with the other layers. Notice that on the mixed terrain, the coastline gets affected by the plateau shapes, and inland areas get cliffs in the same pattern. So, comparing the two, this is the same map area with the plateaus, and now this is it with the land bridges applied. And it's like a huge improvement. Obviously as a playable map sort of thing. One of the side effects of this plateau thing is things get a lot more crinkly, or in my perception they do. I don't, or like, maybe not crinkly, but more sort of randomy. You don't tend to get these sort of gnarly shapes for rivers, or lakes even, in the actual game. And things like that where it's like an inlet. Or, where was the other one that I saw that was really good? This here looks like, actually looks like a kind of a lake with some trees on the side of it. Do you know what I mean? It sort of looks a lot more natural. And this is what's happening with this different map gen. Look at this. This is like a natural harbour, and then a little lake there. So it's starting to get more organic, more realistic. There's a lot, I'm sure cliffs have been stuck up to 11 on this as well, but you can also see a lot more difference between the cliff positions and the edging. But the point I think that Aaron was making is that there is like overlap, there is sort of mixing between the two effectively. So it does still follow, for example here we've got this plateau shape in the middle, and the terrain is not that dissimilar to it. But it is a lot further away. The original generation would have had cliff just running right along the edges of all of this. And some of these, there's a canyon there, look. Nice canyon shape. Another one there. And some of these do look like they could be actually useful. They're still a bit broken up, if I'm honest. But, this here could be useful as a barrier. Well, there was another one that I saw. I was just like, oh, yeah. Oh, here we go. So this one here. You've got a gap there and you've got a gap there, but otherwise that forms a nice barrier across between that as a potential choke point. So it does look like it's working. The other thing that's interesting is this. This has a huge effect on like making the map look organic. This sort of, if you imagine this as like riverbeds or I mean, I made the point that it could look like paths that animals had made as they've, migrated around. But yeah, this sort of wiggly, much more fine detail in the type of terrain has a huge effect on it. And like this, for example, this looks, like a patch of rock or something that, has then been eaten away by weathering and it's exposed this other type of rock. And obviously we can't see it on the normal map gem, but with these islands you can't really get that effect because it's too, there's too much water basically. But yeah, I say this is really starting to look good, just in terms of looking good, But wait, this has gone beyond just tweaking the terrain for better cliffs. This is getting towards overhaul territory. If it's already going to change that much, let's just make Nauvis map the best it can be. So that's what I did. Let's start with the water slider. The minimum amount of water is almost all land, but there are occasional small lakes that are few and far between. Caption on this says min water 100% scale, max water 100% scale. So this is the min water, that's the max water. Okay, and both look pretty awesome. So min water, we get the lake in the middle, which I think is like an absolutely hard-coded, or not hard-coded, but an absolute must. I think even if you turn water down to its absolute lowest setting, you always get this lake in the middle because you need water in order to make steam. And of course you can't dig trenches or holes in the base game. So you always have to have some water, otherwise you have no way of making electricity. Because of course you can make electricity with solar panels and accumulators eventually, but in order to get there, you've got to have electricity in order to do the research to get there. So you have to have some water. But again, what I'm saying about this feather, this like small patterning, these look like dried up riverbeds, or as he says it, animal paths or something like that. That sort of consistent style of this is where the vegetation has been taken away and this is where dirt has been exposed from some previous process, or here this is a bit of the land that got affected by what do you call it, plate tectonics or something, and it's squished up a different shape to the rock, and so you can now see it in the thing, or maybe that's a dried up lake, or this looks like you get that water catchment effect. So it turns out they're called radial patterns. So what it's sort of looking like to me, it always picks such random things. Why is this bloke here? But basically, this is the type of thing it's starting to look like. It's also very fractal, which is something that noise can be used to sort of generate a sort of fake of. But this basic thing of like drainage channels that water has formed naturally is what I'm getting at. Or here, look, this is like a massive delta. And so the river's coming down and as it's so flat, all of the silt is deposited, and so the path and the sort of elevation change is so small that water doesn't have a lot of energy anymore, so it tends to spread out and fill out more of the area. And this is the type of effect it's starting to create, where it's much more. And this here, look, this is like the brownish, dirty land, and you've got the green parts on either side. This is presumably some kind of algae or something like that that's sufficiently wet there that it can grow, and then this is grass because it never gets wet, and here's your tree line and it's got rocks on it. So it's starting to get this more organic feel, and it looks awesome to me. And of course this is really just showing, right, if you whack the water settings to maximum, you don't get this tiny isolated island effect. So this is still a playable map area. You can still get lots of resources on here, and by the time you'd run out or you wanted to expand properly, you're going to have the elevated rail or the capacity to build lots of landfill, and so it's starting to look good. It's starting to look like a proper island, and that's with max water. So you couldn't get any less. I guess there may still be the elevation thing, so you could tweak it that way, but if you slam it up to maximum, you're still going to get usable islands that are pretty meaty and pretty big. It also gives these islands, though, that look so much more realistic. And this is like a Madagascar or something like that. Can I get that one up as well? Yeah, I thought we might show the film. So yeah, the example I'm thinking about is Madagascar, basically, which is a gigantic island off the coast of Africa. And as you can see, it's sort of, because of how it has been broken away, plate tectonics and all that sort of stuff. It looks, similar in style to where it's been removed from. And you've also got these smaller little islands and things like that. And to me, that's the type of thing you're getting. But you've got sort of like in the Mediterranean, you've got the Italian islands, you've got Corsica and all that sort of stuff, where it looks like, because it's sort of the terrain will do this overall, yeah, and then it's just been filled in with water. So this is like a higher point, and this is a higher point, and so all of it's just been filled in with water, and that's the type of effect it's creating. As you can tell, I'm really impressed with this. This is a massive, like, visual improvement to me. But yeah, so these islands here are starting to look like that. That looks like an island that's been moved away, or water has carved the gap between it, and this is like the high point, and this was the softer bit of rock that got weathered away, and then the water filled in the gap. Do you know what I mean? It's starting to get those like geological stories, or to fake them, basically. It even has the effect, and maybe pick this one deliberately, but basically this, looks like an old river that would have been emptying into, and the water has kind of eaten away the edge, coasting edge there. And same here, this is some hard granite, and the water that was flowing out of here has eaten back, but can't eat, the granite compared to limestone or something like that. And it's those sorts of things that it's creating. And you can see with the darker brown, the way it edges around the lighter brown, it looks like it's been, worn away, basically. So it's like this, as I say, could be some water that was, flowing down here, or what have you, that ate away this type of rock, and then this type of rock, and then some nice grassland appeared, and you got some grassland. Do you see what I mean? It just feels way more organic. And then you've got canyons, for example. So you've got there's also interesting here, the water actually follows that same pattern. If you can see that. But then you've got these canyons that are talking about there, and little choke points and things like that. So I'm really really impressed with this. It's such a massive improvement to me. On the other extreme, maxed out water results in nice looking clusters of islands, or an archipelago. And here we go. So min water 25% scale, max water 25% scale. So this is set to min water, but the scaling effect is, I believe, that's the one where it like enlarges and shrinks things. So I guess this would be, where it's had the 100% scale here, which is why, as I say, you can't find water, until you go way, 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 way further away. It sort of brings it all together because it scales it down. But yes, so that's with the 25% scale, and this, max water versus min water. And as you can see, it's maintaining some of the features, so it is exactly the same thing, where just altering that scale. And look how much that looks like proper islands, or as he says, an archipelago type system. It's just so effective. You could imagine this being the Caribbean or something. So here you go. There's more land on this, obviously, but if this is like the Caribbean, for example, you Mexico, Gulf of Mexico, and there's your Atlantic, and it's all in this area. Sort of middle America, basically, and the Pacific Ocean on one side, North America on the other, and the Caribbean is basically this string of islands here. But basically, you see how it creates this like string of islands, these archipelagos, as it's called, where you can see the rock that's been kind of left and not eaten away, basically, and that is so thematically similar to something like this, And there again, even better example, because there's no trees on this, of that effect I'm talking about, where it creates this drainage thing. Obviously this is a mountain, so it's got snow on it type of thing. Those type of effects are what we're now getting, basically. Yeah, so that sort of effect, where it looks like drainage channels, is just so effective. Once the terrain is set up to handle these extreme water values well, it allows for some macro variation if the map is set to normal values too. On a medium water setting, the default, then as you go further from the surface middle, the land starts to oscillate between these extremes to make some massive lakes and wide plains. It's much more varied than before. So that's the thing where any bit of Factorio map that you look at, excluding biters and ore patches, any bit of Factorio map just looks like any other bit of Factorio map. If you ever seen me playing, one of the comments I made is you just can't tell the scale on a Factorio map. You can look at a vast area and sort of go, oh, right, that's just, a short distance. And then you flip to the normal view and it's enormous because the weird self-similarity that it has, which is sort of fractal, isn't it? But the sort of self-similarity it has because of the way it's just a noise pattern that's been filtered means that, say that bit of Factorio map looks like that bit of Factorio map. It doesn't have any character to it, basically. And what Arundel's saying is that basically as you go further away, these values become more extreme, and so you get a gigantic lake, which is a bit like a continent, basically. So you start to get into, this is your continent, then you've got big lakes, and then you've got gigantic land masses on the other side. So it starts to look like a proper planet. Starting in deserts has been a common problem. I added an additional slider so that you can customize the starting area moisture without affecting the rest of the world. A forest start is significantly easier. Forest start will be easier because of the pollution, basically, because trees absorb the pollution, and desert starts are generally harder because the desert terrain doesn't absorb the pollution as much, basically. So this gives you the option of deliberately starting on desert or deliberately starting in a forest. The terrain types for above and below cliffs have been adjusted very slightly so that sometimes there's a slight terrain difference. It's a small point, but makes it feel more 3D and integrated into the world. And that's the thing I was talking about before, where you see here that this, brownish terrain has been kind of massaged to fit better to the cliff. So it looks like a dried up riverbed. Yeah. And it's a real subtle touch that adds a huge amount. A dead end. A lot of things were working really well. The terrain looked much better, it was better to play on, but it wasn't perfect. And here we see an example of the non-perfection. A canyon path blocked by water. So the point is, it's creating these canyons, great. It's creating discrete bodies of water, great. It's like, aligning cliffs, trees to the things, great. These are unbroken cliffs, so they might be useful as a defensive barrier. But it's stuck a massive water feature in the middle of your canyon. Now, I think you as a player could probably squeeze your way around, maybe. I'm not sure. The hitboxes on cliffs are a bit wonky, so you probably could get through here because it's putting trees in, but maybe not. So you certainly couldn't get your car through, and you would. It makes it even better as a barrier, but it really blocks you from passing through. When exploring by car, a lot of the old problems with exploration and navigation were still present. You follow a gap between forests, but there's a small lake blocking the path. You follow a line of cliffs for a gap, but it's blocked by trees. But now there's a new problem where you can follow a land bridge, but then there's a perpendicular cliff that blocks your path. So the exact thing that he was trying to put in has actually become a problem because you're going through this gap, and suddenly there's a cliff, and because it's now an unbroken cliff, you've no way of getting around it, and there's so many trees in the way, making your way through on foot or what have you would be a real pain. So you would be completely blocked off from this until you got cliff explosives. A tree path blocked by a cliff. The problem is the cliff system. The land bridge system and the tree system don't know anything about each other. That's not really solvable though, because the tree system still uses the same peaks definitions as the decoratives mentioned earlier. So here we see a land bridge that's blocked by trees. So because the game doesn't know, these are acting completely independently, it's come and slapped the trees on. As I say, this thing I was saying about picking out the right item and then saying, no, that's water, you can't put it in, but it means that then you get a continuous block of thing. What you'd probably want is for it to say, oh, there's water there, 50% of the time, make sure there's no trees within that distance. But it doesn't do any of that kind of checking. There is no adjusting of the trees to fit the water other than, the blanket condition, don't put trees on water. So I changed that too. Forest noise. Like with the decoratives, the more I looked into the tree system, the more problems I found. In general, it was a bit better because most of the trees were capable of spawning, but there was one tree that was completely excluded because it required a temperature that didn't exist on the planet. The cage box shows the new tree placement volumes, except the box for one tree has been put back to its original place. Can you guess which one it is? I haven't a clue. Basically, so yeah, this tree here, which is presumably this one at the first one here, you can see this has been kind of disappeared. This box that was clearly across this part here is out of here. So this tree will never spawn because it will never have a value. You know, this is the allowed space basically for this planet, and it's outside the allowed space, so it will never spawn that tree. These sorts of problems are very hard to prevent. It takes a huge amount of organisation and understanding to find a lot of these problems. Even then, it takes a while to build a complete picture of what's going on. So when some small thing needs to be adjusted, like adjusting the noise that generates temperature, it's difficult to tell if you've accidentally made a particular tree never spawn. If you change the noise layer of a decorative, you check it and that decorative looks fine, but it's hard to tell if you've made some other random decorative never spawn. We do have tests to warn against accidental changes, but sometimes these negatives can get mixed up with other changes where it's expected that map generation will have changed so they don't get noticed. I think that's kind of a partial explanation as well about the overlapping ones. That how would you actually tell if you say in this diagram here you actually want overlapping areas, you want trees that will be both spawned on sand 1 and sand 2, and you know it becomes like a subset, but only above certain height or what have you, and you maybe do want the values to overlap so that you can have some feathering between the two. Therefore, if you come in and say, right, I want a new decorative, I'm going to set it into this space as well. The problem, of course, is if you want overlap and you want them to be in the same place and you want this type of effect, you're not really making a bug that can be picked up. You know, so if you say you want this one to have a value between 0 and 5 and this one to have a value between 5 and 10, and then someone else comes along and says, right, well, that's great, but I want one that overlaps with those two and it has a value between 2.5 and 7.5. Great. That's an intended feature. And someone else may come along and go, well, I want one that overlaps sort of partially between those, you know, that it goes from 1 to 6 or something like that. And so you can have all these are all allowed states. Well, if someone else comes along and says, well, it has to have a value between 1 and 5, then you've just created two that have exactly the same parameter space. So there is the possibility that, you know, it will only ever pick, you know, because of this doesn't put them on top thing, it will never pick this new one because it will always be picking the first one that goes from 1 to 5. And of course that's a bug in the sense that it's not doing what you want, but it's not a bug in the sense that it's poorly written code or, you know, it's creating a wrong thing essentially. It's just never doing something because you've not set the values properly. And of course, because you want overlap, how would you put in a check that says if these two things overlap, cause it to be a problem? Now, in that case, you could, because you could have a check that does literally say, does it have the exact same start value? Does it have the exact same end value? That if those are the same, that's a problem. But of course, I'm very much simplifying. That's not actually how it works. But the basic point is it's a very difficult thing to catch that type of problem until you really dig in and want it. And I've you know, that's the type of problem I've had to solve in code, and it can be very difficult, especially if it's affecting some other part of the code. You know, it's using the same generation system, for example, and you've put a tweak into it to do something slightly different for what you want, and accidentally it's doing that for the other thing as well, and it's somehow polluting, in a sense, the other system. They seem to have some, you know, approach for checking unintended changes, but of course, when is it an intended change and when is it an unintended change? And that's sounds like some of the reason that these overlapping terrain types and what have you weren't caught, because basically, how would you catch them without spending hours and days looking at it? Anyway, as with decoratives, the tree placement has been changed to make areas more characterful. As before, dry areas generally have reduced tree density, while moist areas have more, but the difference is more extreme and more consistent. The absolute zero moisture desert now doesn't have any trees at all. Do any of these trees look new to you? I couldn't spot the new one. I thought maybe it was this one here, but I don't know. I'm afraid I'm not familiar enough with the trees as such to see it, unless it was some purple tree or, you know, bright green or something. I don't think I'd spot it. I'm just not that observant when it comes to this sort of stuff. But I did want to say, I did wonder if it was this type one, because it looks like a few of these are that as well. But yeah, if you know which one it is, then do give us a shout in the comment. But yeah, the real point here is it's more that it's being consistent. So these are all the same tree types, and they're in a patch, and these are a tree type and these are a tree type. So it's kind of making this whole thing together and bringing it together. And here you've got these dead trees all sort of spawned on this little peninsula here, basically. All this looks nice, which is great, but it's really all for the end goal of integrating the trees with other systems for better gameplay. Natural paths. This is what really ties everything together. The land bridges are defined by ridges, meaning there's a continuous ribbon that determines the high point. When there's a land bridge, this ribbon line travels roughly down the middle of the strip of land. These ribbons are areas that should be kept clear, so they're added to a list of paths. The plateau actually uses a very similar system to the ridges, but it's inverted. The ribbon lines, instead of being high points, are low points, essentially the canyon areas between the hills. If you're following a cliff edge from below, you'll often get funneled into these areas, so it's important that these areas are not blocked by trees, so they're also added to paths. Dense forests are also a problem for moving around, especially if you set the tree density slider to the max and try to move in a moist section of the landscape. An extra set of lines for forest trails was added to the set of paths too. All of these path lines are combined and subtracted from both cliff and tree placement. The result is extremely convenient and feels natural. Forest trails would be the result of animal movement, and it makes sense for these to be connected to the gaps in cliffs because that's where they can get through. If you're following a path over a land bridge, then there's always a way through any cliffs and trees you might encounter. So just read the caption and I'll zoom out and we can look at this properly. Left, red equals canyon path, blue equals land bridge path, green equals tree path. Right, a landscape with maximum tree settings to more clearly show the paths. So this abstract jiggly nonsense is basically the three types of path. We've got the red ones, which is the canyons. So this is where you've got cliffs on either side. You've got blue, which is the land bridge. So those are the strips of land that connect the islands. I suppose they're not islands if they're connected by land, but you get what I mean. And green equals tree paths. So green is then like paths through the trees. So it's assured clear areas. I guess that's the animal trails effectively. Assured clear areas that you can get through, basically. And then the idea is that these are subtracted. So when there's a canyon path, that is removed. That means, don't put any cliff here, don't put any water here, that type of thing, to ensure that you don't end up with these blocked paths, basically, because that would be staggeringly frustrating. So it then shows this actually applied, and it is literally this exact noise pathing, this exact generation rather. So you can see, for example, these little shapes here are these cleared bits. Yeah. And then, I don't know, so we've got that blue bit there. That blue bit there. And as it says, it's hugely effective. There are some bits of it that don't. Well, actually, they do. I was saying I was going to pick on a bit here that looked like it had been slapped on top of the cliff, but it isn't. This is actually broken. This is actually a break in the cliff. So that actually works really well as well. But yes, if you imagine this, to me, it says about their animal trails, but to me, you've kind of got a look. This looks like the Amazon or something like that. Like the Amazon is quite a good example because it's so forested, basically, and you get these flat parts of river, basically. Another one there. Do you see what I mean? So it's the water itself is cutting a path through it. Well, if you then imagine that as a dried up riverbed, that's the type of effect it's getting for me. So this is like the Amazon that's dried up, basically. And you can see that these particularly low parts have still got water in them. Yeah? That's kind of what it looks like to me. And then these do look more like animal paths where, the animals have been wandering around and they found the ways through the trees, and the trees have therefore not spawned because, not grown because the animals have been there. And so you get that reinforcing effect of where, the animals walk on it, the trees grow elsewhere, maybe they're feeding on the fruit from the trees, for example. And so it's forming natural paths that make sense, and they are aligned to the cliffs because they wouldn't be able to pass the cliffs. And then you get, a natural lake in here, and this looks so much better. I mean, it's minor in a sense, it's not really changing the game apart from improving how cliffs work. And I assume also cliffs have been ramped up on this. It says trees there, but I think cliffs have probably been ramped up a bit as well, because there seem to be a lot on this. But they're also forming different shapes, and potentially useful shapes. I can't see a specific example offhand, but maybe this could be turned into a set of walls going round, or you could use this as a defensive hardpoint or something like that. Actually, that's not a bad one. You've got a big chunk that's blocking off a tree there for somewhere you might be thinking about doing a choke point. But yeah, to me, this looks so much more organic, so much more realistic, and some like an actual planet. And that's always been my complaint about the map gen in Factorio, is that it just looks like noise. It occasionally managed to get something that was a bit crinkly and a bit like an actual coastline, but generally it just looks like a very simple, I don't know, it wasn't simple, but a simple cut pass, above this certain value land, below this certain value water. And so you would end up with something that was jiggly around the edges, but it wasn't ever really looking like terrain. This looks like terrain. There are, of course, exceptions where things block each other, but these tend to be coincidences. For example, terrain just happens to connect between two lakes, making what is effectively a land bridge, but because it was not created by the special land bridge system, the route is not protected and it has a chance to get clogged with trees. The true test of this for me was to set trees and cliffs to maximum settings and try to navigate the map by car. And you know what? That's actually a really cool map to move around on now. Finishing touches. Here are the results, and as we see, this is a map at 100% scale, according to the caption, and it looks so much better. You've got nice detail going on, you've got like proper things that look like proper lakes with like small joining lakes, and it just looks so much more real and so much more interesting. These are the cliffs, I think, at the like proper settings rather than ramped up to give the effect. And they're very few and far between. They're not, if I'm totally honest, necessarily good for choke pointing. Maybe here could be, but equally they're not just all over the place and completely in the way in really annoying ways. We've then got map at 50% scale. Note when changing scale, only elevation style features are resized. Things like ore stay in the same place. Effectively sort of zooming out on the same map, again, we're starting to get much more randomy type shapes. This is a swampy type area, I guess, and this is like desert. It's not quite as effective at this scale, I would say. But then we get this one, which is map at 25% scale, and it does start to get much more variety, much more sort of wiggliness in what's going on with the water. There do appear to be a lot more cliffs on this one, so this would be, I think, still quite annoying to play at, but you would be making your life quite deliberately hard in this case. Finally then, another map at 25% scale, and last couple of ones here showing the overall effect. This is a really good example of what he's talking about using them as useful things. You'd only have to defend this bit, and then you could defend it where you wanted, but you could defend it there, and then all of this area is just unpassable for biters, so it funnels them all towards your actual thing, and you just have to be careful not to build closer enough to this wall in order to get spat on, basically. We've then got really lovely canyon effect here, and the brown stuff being used to show the path. Another even better canyon here, looks even better there. And again, tweaking the colour, of that's used in this canyon area really emphasises the effect. Really impressive. And then pass through the forest, and you can just imagine just driving along here, no problems, just occasionally hitting the random dead tree, and through you go. Some of these features are a bit weird to explain. Why would that be blocked off? But it's way better. I put a lot of work into this, and I've been testing it heavily through the entire process. It's finally working really well. There's still more testing to do because it's such a big change and it affects everyone in a very significant way. There are some minor things to do a bit better, like more patchy forest edges, but that's not a significant change to gameplay. So that's just saying that these are very much like clumped. There's not a sort of nice reduction in number of trees around the edge. It literally just sort of stops in a hard line. The safety net for all these changes is that the new terrain is extremely customizable. Even if you don't like some settings, it's easier to adjust the map the way you like it. For example, I made some extra changes to the cliff frequency slider so that the value below 100% will remove cliffs from huge sections of the map. Also, if you really like the old terrain, it's still there along with single island map gen option. So it sounds like we might have a toggle for this that you can switch off new gen, old gen. Interesting. As always, follow the trails to the usual places. Speculation. Well, I cannot think of anything to speculate about. I guess overall thoughts is probably more appropriate on this one, which is just, I've been saying it all along. It's just amazing. I think it looks really, really, really good. As I was reading it through and I was thinking, oh, this is just a random blog post about nothing in particular. And then we got here and I was like, wow, that looks like an actual river. And then, wow, this looks like an actual canyon. And yeah, this is such a huge improvement for me. I know, the look of Factorio is not, necessarily the prettiest, not everybody's cup of tea. I've always said I really love it. I love that dingy diesel punk aesthetic to all the engineer does. And generally speaking, I think the graphics look good. The map gen was always the problem. For me, as I've said in the video, through the main body, the whole thing of you generate the map and it just looks the same everywhere. That has always been my biggest problem with the map gen. It's just boring, which was fine. The whole point of the game is just to build a massive factory, isn't it? So does it matter that it's boring terrain? No, but it would be nice, and particularly if you want to build in, say, a factory, like individual factories doing individual jobs, as it were, having a map system that kind of supports that, so this one here, I mean, this is not how you'd want it basically, but if you imagine this island is where you make red circuits or something, and this one is where you make blue circuits, and that one's, do you know what I mean? It sort of just feels more like it would work in that sort of style, and I say this isn't actually how it's ended up being, but the basic point of making it feel like particular areas are special, I would suggest that the next step for this has to be the ore generation, because the ore generation does still seem to be, it's slapped on top as a random, spattering of ore generation. And it would be lovely if you had, say for example, this area just became your iron mines and your iron smeltery, your iron foundry, because say all of these patches were iron, and then there's just big patches of coal up here, or maybe making it more thematic in the sense that, now this would be tricky, particularly given the map settings they give us, but perhaps all of the oil is more heavily focused in desert, because that's where you tend to find it on Earth type of thing, or coal is very heavily focused in treed areas because it's where ancient woodlands have been buried and turned into coal. So yeah, that sort of thing would be awesome, and to be able to, because the other problem with like the cliffs and those sorts of things is you build where your resources are. You build where your copper is, you build where your iron is. Literally just from a point of view of, that's where you put your miners down, but also you're going to have a tendency to build, particularly earlier on, your iron foundry, your iron smelting is going to be close to your iron, because that's just the most sensible thing to do. So to have it more sort of clustered resources, or at least having the option for it, so that all iron is here and all copper is here and all stone is here, and it's just more thematically linked, as it were, or more locally based, to have the oil in one particular location, and it's multiple patches. I'm not saying it isn't, I'm not saying it's one gigantic patch, but having this is where all iron is, and you can always find it in this particular type of terrain, would be awesome. I don't know how you would quite get that to work and be balanced because of the sliders they give us. You could turn off water, and how would it then work around that? But as I say, it just feels like all patches need to be the next upgrade here, because they're still just completely random blob. They're not even aligned with, like you've got this nice crinkly effect here, and then you've got this iron patch that just goes across them. It's just, a blob somewhere on a map. It's not tied into what's going on. You could have it so that, stone patches never had trees on them because it's a stony patch of ground. So how are trees going to grow on a stone patch? Or trees are always on a coal patch because that's, coal is an ancient forest. And as I say, oil always on desert type tiles and that sort of thing. That would be really awesome. It does feel like that should be the next thing. I'm not sure they will do that because that would then be quite a massive change, but that would be something I would love to see. If you had it so that iron was only ever built on this type of terrain, for example, then you could imagine this is like the rain, the water has washed away the land to reveal the iron patches, So that was the only thing I had a thought on. It just looks awesome. I just really can't wait to play on this newly generated map. Particularly this, as I say, Amazon without the water, and presumably if you did increase the water level, suddenly these would all be water channels, and that would absolutely look like the Amazon. And they've obviously changed the ambience thing as well, haven't they? So that when we're near forests, we're going to get all bird sound and all that sort of thing. So it's going to be really much more evocative and much more realistic in a sense, even though realism is sort of a pointless concept, but in a game. But it just have a much better feel to it, I think, and that is going to be so good. That was about it, really. I don't really have any other comments on this. I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you want to chat about this Factorio Friday Facts or Factorio in general, then you can find me live streaming Factorio every Saturday over on my Twitch channel @Trismegistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Hardy bush.